when you were cruel to someone that you loved and you no longer have the opportunity to be kind to them because they're gone now, that lingers.
Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Rejoice then, O heaven, and you that dwell therein.
I had the honor of interviewing Ronnie Pontiac for the original Dweller film. He's a documentary producer, lecturer, and writer about all things spiritual, metaphysical, and astrology. He was also Manly P. Hall's assistant back in the day, which is super cool. I came across an article he wrote about the Dweller during my research for the film, and found it remarkably well-researched and articulate. I knew right away he was a wealth of knowledge, and that I needed to talk to him more about the Dweller for inclusion in the original doc, which I did. What you're about to listen to is an extended edit of my interview with Ronnie Pontiac, tracing the origins, history, and evolving interpretations of the Dweller on the Threshold.
It's interesting because it's said to be the dweller of the threshold, the dweller on the threshold, the guardian. There was all these like similar phrases, but none of them were exactly the same. And often the terminology was around malignancy and darkness, and it was this frightening character. And so I was curious, what is this thing that everybody's warning us about that supposedly afflicts us as soon as we get on the spiritual path? And I wondered if it had something to do with what I had read in Blavatsky, which was that when we enter the spiritual path, it seems that all the worst parts of ourselves come out first. And I thought, well, maybe that's the dweller. And then later on, as I ran into it again, I just thought, I got to find out what this thing is. And the only way to find out is to go back and to find out where it first appeared in history and to see how writers changed the idea of it over time.
To start on this deep dive, we have to go way back to 1842, when the first known written reference to the Dweller on the Threshold appeared in the novel Zanoni by Edward Bulwer Lytton.
In Zanoni, he says, this is a quote, "Amidst the dwellers of the threshold is one, too, surpassing in malignity and hatred all her tribe." So this said, well, there's a bunch of different dwellers on the threshold, and one of them, apparently, is a lot worse than all the other ones, which was a little confusing to me. And then as he went on into the description, he's talking about dark shrouded and veiled and larva-like in a burning glare, livid, and all these kind of dramatic descriptions of something that coming out of a Judeo-Christian background takes on a kind of demonic quality. And eventually he goes on to describe this weird kind of sadomasochistic scene where the dweller comes on to him and crawls into bed with him and wants to mingle breath with him. And this is this horrifying experience. Now, that didn't really help me understand so much what that was. I knew he was referring to something that could be the Jungian shadow. There were other interpretations that occurred to me, but I wanted to find out more from other writers about what exactly this was. So the next reference that I found was from Blavatsky.
We're going to talk a bit more about the more psychological interpretation of the Dweller being the same or similar metaphor as the Jungian shadow in the next episode. But for now, let's continue on the timeline with a look at Blavatsky's interpretation.
She has this quote where she says, "Our dweller is about us all the time. Everything which conflicts with good is an operation of that dweller. Everything which prevents us from taking those steps which we can see would be the better ones for us to take is a dweller. The greatest dweller we have is doubt, suspicion, fear, lack of faith." So here again, the greatest we have, meaning more than one kind of dweller. So do they mean that we all have our own dwellers, or do they mean that we have many dwellers within us? I'm wondering at this point. Also, if this does seem in Blavatsky's description to have something to do with the Jungian shadow, this contrary force, And for me, as somebody who has studied the Orphic mysteries, what came to mind immediately was the Orphic idea that human beings are the product of the fusion of the Titans, who are envious, destructive, hate the gods, and want to do nothing but ruin the harmony of the world. And on the other hand, that we have this immortal, divine part of ourselves, and we're in a constant struggle. So in that sense, it looks to me like the dweller represents the part of ourselves that are resistant to the spiritual side of life. In her introduction to yoga, Annie Besant talks about these dwellers. She calls them elementals, and she says they guard the astral plane. And but then she describes them as persistent, evil thought forms that we have created during our lives. And she says there's another class that are the astral and mental remnants of previous incarnations, and they're still attached to us. So it's kind of like, as we rise out of an incarnation and we leave behind a lot of the experiences and the particularities of life, and these just become part of the historical record. And as we return to the next life, it's almost like within the atmosphere of the planet, this watery air that we breathe, and that lingering there are these energies, these thoughts, these bad emotions that we dwelt on for a lifetime are there. And that when we return to this place, they are drawn to us again, and they become part of us here again, so that we can face those lessons again and hopefully resolve them.
For longtime listeners and followers, if Annie Besant's interpretation reminded you of anything, you're not alone.
It reminds me, for example, of the currently very popular occult concept of the egregore.
It was actually Brianna who brought the concept of egregores to our attention a couple years ago, and as many of you know, we've been obsessed ever since. Anyways, let's get back into the weeds of some more interpretations of the dweller as we continue to analyze how the idea of it has morphed and evolved.
I think that as you see it develop over time through the writings of theosophists like Hartman and Rowe, and they take it into, like, for instance, Rowe talks about how this is a battle against the lower passions of the physical body, and that the needs and limitations of the physical body create this kind of resistance to our spiritual side. And then when you look at, for instance, what Hartman has said about it, he's talking about how it has to be conquered, and we displace our self-love with love of the eternal good. And as we'll see as we continue our conversation, as you kind of climb these steps of the descriptions, you begin to get an idea of something that I think is pretty clear about what this thing is. And so from my point of view, you're dealing with, consider how human beings, how we live our lives when we are not spiritually awake. As I mentioned in the article, in The Secret of the Golden Flower, we're told, this is a old Taoist alchemical text. It says that when we take on incarnation, our soul metaphorically divides. The lower soul, which is where our consciousness resides, is in the body running this fantastic orchestrated symphony of millions, of infinity almost, of cells and molecules and organs, and everything kept in harmony so that we can proceed through time and sustain ourselves. But for an immortal soul that is used to being able to go anywhere and be anything, and is used to eternity, not time, it's a claustrophobic, horrifying experience. And according to The Secret of the Golden Flower, what happens to us is we identify so much with the body and the processes of the body that we begin to feel the impermanence of the world as a threat to us. And we feel that the world is powerful and eternal, and we're weak, and we're going to be effaced at any moment. And we grow to hate life, and we hate people. We're judgmental, we're angry, we hate ourselves, and we live in this combination of fear and anger that is closed off from the higher soul, which is always there, and which cherishes life as this mysterious dream and this mysterious kind of collaborative creation of the ultimate in theater, or whatever you want to call it. And so we can appreciate from that higher vantage all the harmonies in life, that we are not impermanent, that our conscious essence goes on, but that the world is actually fragile and impermanent, and all that we love in the world is afflicted with this impermanence. Now, to illustrate the dweller from my point of view, consider this. So as we go through life without spiritual awareness, we're very self-forgiving. So we get angry, we're frustrated, things are not going our way. We might kick the dog or lash out at someone we love, a family member, and we expect to be forgiven for this. We feel aggrieved, and we don't take it to heart. Now, when we begin to develop the empathy that comes with spiritual awakening, very often what happens is we look back on our lives and we see the things that we did. And even apparently minor, very forgivable things. I loved this particular pet of mine, but I was cruel to this animal because I was upset. And maybe for our entire existence together, it was mostly a wonderful friendship, but there were a couple times when I did something wrong, and you feel it. You feel the regret as if it's etched into eternity, because you know that you only have that opportunity in that situation when you were facing that to show love and to be patient and not to share your affliction with someone that you care about. And as you climb, you have to see all of these sort of faults and actions that were taken that you regret. And according to Blavatsky and many who define the dweller, it's not just this life. It's all your lives. It's your entire karma from when you first came into existence on this level. And not only that, but you also have the karma of your nation, of your race, of your city. And all of these are dwellers on the threshold. And so as we grow spiritually and we see the world as it is, we see a lot of injustice. We see a lot of ignorance and a lot of unnecessary suffering. And it's difficult to look at. It's horrifying. And to me, this is part of the dweller, is coming to grips with all of this negativity that we ourselves have inflicted on the world, but also that has occurred around us and that we're entangled in because of how our society does things. The more spiritual we become, the kind of bird's eye view that we get causes us to see what we've done with this precious time that we have here. And we feel intense regret and pain about the pain that we've caused to others. And this can be a serious blockage in one's spiritual path, because the melancholy and the regret can lead to feelings of futility that get in the way of being able to integrate the dweller, to integrate all these fears, to learn from what we did so that we don't do it again, and that what we bring into the world after that is what we intend to bring, which is light and warmth and above all love. Now let's go back again and look at Bulwer-Lytton and this kind of strange, abusive situation that he describes going on in the bed with this demonic dweller presence, and the revulsion that he describes, the intimacy of the breath. See, to me, this is conveying what you feel when you confront your own evil. I'm somebody that when I was young, I was pretty evil, and I did all kinds of things, and I never thought about it. And when I woke up spiritually and I looked back on the people that I hurt and the things that I did, it was something that was just like that description. It was a demonic presence with glaring eyes that was trying to breathe my breath and crawl into bed with me because I couldn't get away from this feeling of, how could I have done that to somebody that I loved? How could I have acted that way in this world? And the intimacy of owning your own evil, of owning your own misdeeds, is, I think, well described in that Bulwer-Lytton passage. And in most of these descriptions where they talk about it being Cerberus, or like Franz Hartmann compares it to the dragon that Michael battles. And that dragon, that's us. We're both Michael and the dragon. And to battle the dragon and to integrate it, to make it part of ourselves so that it's no longer being destructive, but it can be put into constructive efforts, I think is the effort required for the dweller. And it's a difficult thing to face yourself, those regrets, when you were cruel to someone that you loved and you no longer have the opportunity to be kind to them because they're gone now. That lingers in a way, in my experience and for many people that I've worked with, that is even stronger than those experiences of the highest consciousness. And I feel like that's part of this alchemical process that we go through on spiritual paths, of taking the darkness within us and in the world and transmuting it into light and love. And so I think that when we are personalizing the dweller and we're classifying the dweller, that these are useful metaphors for us to come to grips with aspects of our experiences as human beings. But there's always the danger, as Wittgenstein pointed out, that the words, when they're taken out of context, the metaphors become a thing. So it's taken literally. And we think, well, there is this creature that, lives, it's the dweller, and it's after us. And I actually dealt with people when I was screening for Manly Hall who were really afraid of entities like the dweller, that they thought that these entities were stalking them, or that the dweller was going to eat their soul or something. And that was never really the threat.
At this point in the interview, I bring up to Ronnie that Manly P. Hall himself had a very interesting interpretation of the dweller. He called Freemasons, quote, dwellers upon the threshold of the innermost. He's
saying that the Masons are people who are dwelling on the threshold where spirituality and materiality meet. So they have both effective material awareness. They can do practical things in the world to make the world better, but they're also bringing that spiritual awareness that they've earned. And by dwelling on that threshold, they've accomplished what Plato really suggested about philosophy, which is it's learning how to die before you die. You've already had your consciousness be liberated from the belief that you're just this one life in this one body, and all you are is your body. And the Masons, they're everything that they're doing is leading them up to the understanding that that's not the case, that they're much more than that, and that they can use that awareness to work in the world to make the world a better place for people. That is a radically different interpretation, and I thought it was great that he went there with it. And I actually had an experience with him that I think reflects on it somewhat, because when I first started screening for him, he and his secretary wanted me to have experience with, so what does he do, when people go in that room with him and they tell him the problems, all kinds of things, they ceremonial magicians who suddenly thought, oh my God, I don't think I closed the circle right, and then they believe there's a demon who's afflicting them, or spiritualists who believe that some sort of an entity has attached to them, and just all sorts of problems that arise, including from traditional religious practices. And so what they would do is his secretary would let me sit in her office and would leave the door cracked open slightly so I could listen in and hear what he was saying. And I could see the kind of people he wanted to counsel and what I could say in situations like that. So one time, this really old Mason came in, somebody who had been studying with him for many years. They were both in their 80s. And they sat in his office having cookies and tea, which was his favorite afternoon libation, except sometimes they had martini in a coffee cup, but not when he was meeting with people. And this person said, I sense death nearing. And he was very alarmed that he may not have had enough spiritual practice to stay awake, to remember himself, to not just kind of get lost in the bardos and drift into another life or something. And it was so wonderful. Manly Hall was so reassuring. He thought, this fellow, this Mason, that he would have extrasensory perceptions firing off and all kinds of things that would make him know that he had achieved this radical new awareness and he was ready. But Manly Hall said to him, no, it's not like that. He said, you're fine. He said, dying is simple. And this phrase that has always stuck with me, the habit of consciousness persists. He saw this as a very different thing. And it's very interesting to me because he was very influenced by Blavatsky and by Theosophy in the early days. And for him to have moved into this completely different interpretation was actually somewhat unusual for him. And I think that he just came to this realization. He was so sensitive to trying not to put damaging material out. So I think that he thought that the idea of the dweller, because he had seen people come through his office door who were terrified because they had read something about the dweller and they just thought that some horrible fate was awaiting them. And I think he wanted to put another definition out there that to him was actually more accurate, because the point of the dweller on the threshold is the threshold, right? Getting to the threshold. When you're on that threshold, you're right there. You're at that point where spiritual awareness connects to material existence.
The original film spent so much time trying to answer the question of what we experienced. Eventually, you have to stop looking outwards and start looking inwards. Because as Ronnie put it,
we're missing that this is all about us and our interface with the world, how we act in the world, what we bring into the world. And the monster is us.